I wanted to talk today about my great-grandfather, Rabbi Eliezer Poupko. But before I say that, I wanted to share with you that whenever I tell people my last name is Poupko, they ask me, are you related to that Rabbi Poupko or this Rabbi Poupko? The answer is most often yes, because in our family there are dozens, many, who are rabbis and teachers and Jewish communal leaders. And the reason for that is very much my great-grandfather, Rabbi Eliezer Poupko. We're all descendants of his. And he had 8 children, 7 of whom became rabbis and leaders in the Jewish American world. And I wanted to speak a little bit about him because even though I never met him, few people in the world have had a greater impact on me than my great-grandfather, Rabbi Eliezer Poupko. And I want to share with you because the lessons of how he impacted his family are lessons that every person who is Jewish and wants to foster a generational connection to Judaism can learn a lot from. There's a great deal to be learned from what he did for his family and how so many people in his family remained Orthodox, committed to Judaism in ways that were just absolutely uncommon in the 1920s and 1930s. So Rabbi Eliezer Poupko was born in the town of Radin. Now, the town of Radin is one that you should not have heard of because it's a pretty small town in Belarus, but it happens to be, there's a very, very famous person there, the Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisrael Meir HaKohen. He also lived in that town. So he was born in that town. He was very much part of the town's culture, and his father was Rabbi Yaakov Yoshua Heschel, and he was very much part of that town and the scenery, and he knew the Chafetz Chaim, and it was a town that had a great reverence to Judaism. He then went on to study in the yeshivas of Telz, Slobodka, and Volozhin, all of which were leading yeshivas in Europe at the time, and he was a great student. There's one story shared in the book about the Musar movement that says that the Alter of Slobodka, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of the Slobodka Yeshiva, which happened to have been in Kovna, Slobodka, in Lithuania, told him to go sell raffle tickets benefiting the yeshiva, and he refused because he was very shy. And the Alter of Slobodka forced him, and he sent someone with him, and he was like, you have to go. And when he came back, he said, I didn't need someone to sell these tickets. I knew that one day you're going to need to knock on doors, to fundraise, and to do that kind of work. And I wanted to prepare you for that. And so that's how learning in Slobodka prepared him. He learned in Slobodka and Velizh. Now, who he married also made a huge difference in his life. He married Peshachaya Sapir, the daughter of Rabbi Yaakov Moshe Sapir, who was the chief rabbi of the city of Saratov, very large city in Russia to this day. And he married the daughter of the Rav of Saratov. And not only did his wife have great faith in him, but also all of her sisters married tremendous Torah scholars. One married Rabbi Avram Trop, the son of Rav Naftali Trop, the Rosh Yeshiva in Radin. Another, my great aunt, married Yoshua Levinson, the grandson of the Chafetz Chaim, who was the mashgiach in the yeshiva in Radin. Another married a Rav Siegel, who was a great American leader. His children were great American leaders. Nachum Siegel, that whole Siegel family. And I'm trying to make sure I don't forget anybody, but there is one more I'm forgetting. There was Sapir, there was Poupko, there was Trop, there was Levinson, and Siegel. So anyhow, and then there were sons who later moved to Petach Tikva, became a very famous rabbinic family in Petach Tikva. That's another conversation, the Sapir family, but also a family of great rabbis. But Rabbi Eliezer Poupko married her, and he became a Rav in a small town in Poland called Kulish. Then he moved eventually to a small city called Velizh. Velizh is in the Smolensk region of Russia, and he was a Rav there. Now, so far, seems like a very generic Eastern European life. So when did he start standing out? What happened was, in 1917, you had the Soviet Revolution, and there was extraordinary turmoil, and then the Soviets, the communists, began a war against Judaism. Now, he was the Rav of the city. He was a primary target for their hate, for their harassment. Almost every rabbi didn't stand up to these communists, socialists, thugs who launched a war against Judaism. But he did. And when he was the Rav, they told him to give his certification, his kosher certification, to a butcher who sold pork. And he told them, first he was like, yeah, sure, that sounds good. He got up in shul that Shabbos when they told him to announce that it's kosher. He said it's absolutely not kosher. And they ran at him. He was very, he was assaulted by the the Jewish section of the Communist Party several times, but he didn't step down, and he was sent to Siberia several times. He was sentenced. Each time was another story of how he got out, but he was essentially refusing to step down or give in to the mob. There's letters of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe to him. They met each other in 1929 in, I believe it was Leningrad, and they refused. They were working on holding up Judaism in Soviet Russia. There's one wild story that he's walking in his town in Velizh, and he hears cries and screams, and he sees a Jewish woman being dragged by these communist, socialist members of the Sektia. And he asks them, why are you dragging this poor widow? She has several children at home. What are you doing to her? And they say, oh, she's on her way to be executed. She was sentenced by us to execution. He's shocked. And he says, why? So the answer they give is she had at home 8 kilograms of salt, and it's only allowed to have 2. And so she's a bourgeois, enemy of the state, capitalist, what have you not. And he looks at them, and these are people who used to go to his synagogue, to his classes. These are people who were formerly committed to Judaism. And he says, have you guys lost your minds? What's wrong with you? And they say, Rabbi, we also have a bullet for you. And that is when he understood that these people are pretty serious and beyond repair. And that's when, with the help of his sister, Eliezer Poupko's sister, was living at the time in St. Louis, married to someone from the Raskus family, which is a very prominent, very wealthy American family who also he knew from Radin. They were also great Torah scholars, very committed to the Lithuanian Jewish Torah scholarship way of life, and that is who his sister married. And that's what really saved them. He got in touch with his sister who was living in St. Louis, and basically is like, we got to get out of here. And so even though he was sentenced to Siberia a few times, his wife spoke to the judge, got him out. And eventually the family escapes in the dark of night with all their books. And they come to Radin in Poland, where they spend about a year. And that, I believe, is the same year that the Chafetz Chaim passes away. Now, very important detail I forgot to mention is that when his 2 sons, or 3 sons actually, become 11, he smuggles them across the border from Soviet Russia to Poland so they can go learn in the yeshivas of Radin and Baranovich. So doing something like that was just so wild, but also showed such an extraordinary devotion to Torah study, to Judaism. I think that's just an important example. He just, the absolute devotion to Torah scholarship is really extraordinary. And so he smuggles his sons Yitzchak, Reuven, and Avramaya across the border to go study in Radin and Baranovich. Then the family arrives in Radin. They all come to the United States with help of his sister. I believe her name, I don't want to get it wrong, but I believe her name was Leah, but maybe not. Raskus, and he becomes a Rav in Haverhill, Massachusetts, in Providence, Rhode Island, and then eventually in Philadelphia. Obviously, his kids are also there. He's sending them to yeshivas. His kids could have become easily Americanized, but he and his wife obviously had a way of raising their children to be both American and also deeply committed to Judaism. His daughter married Rabbi Savitsky in who was in Radin at the time, Mordechai Savitsky. I believe it was 1938, right before the Holocaust, and she went there. Kind of a wild concept. She went there, married him before she ever met him, and came back to the United States. His other daughter married Rav Gedalia Schwartz, and really his kids were extremely devoted to Judaism. When he was in the United States of America, Rav Eliezer Poupko was very passionate in the years of the war to protest on behalf of European Jewry, and I guess this is very much of an inspiration to me, on behalf of European Jewry, on behalf of letting Jews into Israel against the white paper, the British white paper that banned Jews from coming into Israel, and also establishing Jewish life in America, building Jewish life in America. Those were his roles. That's what he did through Agudas Arabanim, other parts. But at this point, he's already getting older. This is where his son, my grandfather, Rabbi Bernard Baruch Poupko, really picks it up in terms of building a Jewish day school in Pittsburgh, where he was a Rav, and really furthering the kosher standards in America and so on. But in terms of what lessons I think he left for his children, I think number one was the lesson of devotion to his family. He was extraordinarily devoted to his family, made sure to show up, to be there for everyone. And even though he also, on the one hand, sent his kids across the border, not knowing if he'd ever see them again, that's because he wanted them to be in yeshiva and study Torah from great Torah scholars. But once that goal was met, he was very, very devoted and made sure to be there for his children, for his grandchildren. They always knew he had their back, and their admiration for him knew no boundaries. That's one thing. The other thing I think that is extraordinary is devotion to the community, to the Jewish people, not only thinking about himself, but thinking about the entirety of the Jewish people. Very, very important. And one more thing I think is extremely important is respecting his wife. His wife, Peshachaya, was not only an extraordinary woman in her own right, but she was a great Torah scholar who herself loved learning. And that was not something that used to be sought after. The fact that a woman was so knowledgeable was not a standard thing, but he had great respect for that, and that's it. He gave her space, and he respected that tremendously, and that is how together they brought up in an age. It seems to us like a no-brainer today, but to have someone with 8 children in those days, in the 1920s, 30s, and even 40s, all of whom would just observe the Sabbath, remain Shomer Shabbos, was almost unheard of. Not to mention that they would all become rabbis, teachers, community leaders. Unheard of, absolutely unheard of. And that was really through his love, his dedication, and just the belief that there can't be anything else. He was willing to do anything, and his children knew that. And sometimes the best lesson you can teach your children is the sacrifices that you're willing to make, because you can lecture them all you want, but if they don't know that you're willing to put everything on the line for this, it doesn't have the same weight. And so the fact that his children knew that he was willing to go to Siberia 4 times, and he was willing to do anything to stand up for the observance of Shabbos, of kosher, of Torah study, that I think remained with generations. And so I'm very honored to be his great-grandson. Few people have left an impact on me like he has, even though he died in 1961. Today is his Yortzeit, Yud Gimel Tishrei. He's a great man, and as the saying goes, every person has the obligation to say, Masai yagiu masai lemasai avosai. When will I ever have my own deeds meet those of my ancestors, of my forebearers?